The crimson sun dipped lower, painting the grotesque feast in hues of blood and fire. So, Avia, no, let's call her Lyra, Commander Lyra of the Kthar Protectorate, began, her voice tight, this meal. Explain. He called it dinner, her people called it sacrilege. But as Kale, no, let's name him Jax, spoke, the only thing more dangerous than his actions was the unsettling logic behind them. Jax, the Terran Marine who seemed to have fallen from the stars onto this hostile moon, Xylos, didn't even flinch. He gestured with a half-gnawed bone from the Kthar's most feared beast, the Night Howler. It jumped me, he stated, a weariness in his voice that belied the feral pride glinting in his eyes. Perimeter check. Standard stuff. He then recounted the battle with a disturbing casualness, describing how his standard-issue pulse carbine had run dry, forcing him to rely on his combat knife and, as he put it with a grim chuckle, a bit of old-fashioned Terran persuasion. Close quarters. Against a Night Howler. Lyra felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Such a thing was unthinkable, a death sentence. These creatures, obsidian-scaled and lightning-fast, were the stuff of Kthar nightmares, entities her people, for all their advanced technology, only engaged from heavily armed skimmers or fortified positions. Never, ever, hand to claw. You fought it, like that? The words were a choked whisper, her disbelief warring with a morbid fascination. Alone. Jax shrugged, his calloused fingers tracing a fresh, purpling gash on his forearm that peeked from his tattered environment suit. Didn't have much of a welcoming committee out here, Commander. He then offered more details, not as boasts, but as simple statements of fact. He spoke of human tenacity, of a species forged in the crucible of 1,000 forgotten wars on a distant death world called Earth. We didn't claw our way to the top of our particular food chain by playing nice, Lyra. There it was again, that unsettling blend of arrogance and unshakable truth. And by the way, it's Jax. Jax Calder. Lyra straightened, her own training reasserting itself. Commander Lyra Vane, Kthar Protectorate. My mission was a routine supply drop and status check on this outpost. Her gaze swept the desolate, wind-scoured landscape of Xylos, a far cry from the verdant homeworld. I did not expect to find a Terran, picnicking on a harbinger of death. She spoke of the Night Howlers then, of their pack tactics, their chilling intelligence, how they could decimate entire colonies with brutal efficiency. Whispers even said they were evolving, becoming something more. Jax just took another bite of the roasted meat, the sound unnervingly domestic. Everything dies if you hit it hard enough, in the right spot, he countered, a philosophy so alien, so brutally pragmatic, it sent a shiver down her spine. What kind of species produced beings like this? Were all Terrans so dangerously adaptable? A silence fell, not comfortable, but charged. The crackle of the alien wood in Jax's makeshift fire pit was the only sound. Lyra found herself studying him, truly studying him. His casual confidence, the way his body, even at rest, seemed coiled with contained power. He was an enigma, this Jax Calder. Infuriating. Arrogant. And undeniably, disturbingly capable. Was this the famed human philosophy she'd only read about in classified Kthar intelligence briefings? The reports painted Terrans as relentless, unpredictable, their survival instincts honed to a razor's edge. Seeing it personified was something else entirely. He broke the silence, his voice surprisingly gentle. So, about those supplies, Commander. Lyra blinked, pulled from her reverie. Ah, yes. My transport is just beyond that ridge. She gestured with a slender, three-fingered hand. Standard provisions. Though I see you've improvised your protein intake. A dangerous grin spread across Jax's face, making her biofeedback implants register a spike in her own heart rate. Well, when dinner tries to eat you first, Lyra, it's only polite to return the favor. He stood, stretching, the movement rippling muscles under his torn suit. Lyra averted her gaze, a strange heat rising to her cheeks. This was ridiculous. He was a primitive, a barbarian performing an act of utter defilement. And yet, I will need to document this, she said, her voice regaining its professional, commanding tone. The Kthar High Council will demand a full report. A Terran engaging a night howler, and winning. This is unprecedented. Document away, Jack said, his nonchalance a stark contrast to her internal turmoil. He walked towards her transport, his limp barely noticeable. Though, fair warning, Commander. This probably won't be the last time something like this happens around me. Trouble has a way of sniffing me out. Somehow, Jack's colder, she murmured, watching him, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. But as the twin crimson suns of Xylos began their final descent, painting the jagged peaks in shades of blood and violet, the very air around them seemed to change. An unnatural stillness fell over the land. The hardy, purple-leafed scrub that dotted the landscape began to sway, yet there was no wind. Jax, who had been idly checking his carbine's energy cell, froze. His head snapped up, nostrils flaring almost imperceptibly. Every line of his body went taut. Something's wrong, he rasped, his voice a low growl. The local fauna, it's too quiet. Lyra consulted her wrist-mounted Omni tool, her elegant features tightening with concern. Atmospheric pressure is plummeting. Spectrographic analysis shows, gods, a Xylan megacyclone is forming. ETA, less than an hour. And it's moving with impossible speed from the northern ice plains. Jax's eyes, the color of a stormy Terran sky, were already scanning the darkening perimeter, dismissing the readings. That's not all, he muttered, almost to himself. The fine hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and primal survival instinct that had saved his life countless times. We've got company. As if summoned by his words, a low, guttural growl echoed through the gathering gloom. Then another. And another. Lyra's breath hitched. Night howlers. A full pack, their silhouettes beginning to materialize against the bruised twilight. They must have caught the scent of their fallen packmate, their hunger stoked by the approaching storm. But one of the growls, it was different. Deeper, more resonant, carrying an almost intelligent cadence that sent a fresh wave of dread through Lyra. Jax heard it too, she saw the flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, a new calculation. He didn't voice it, but the unspoken question hung between them, was this the Alpha? Or something else entirely? The unique sound was almost commanding. Lyra felt a primal terror grip her, the kind Kthar warriors were trained to suppress but never truly extinguish when facing these planet-born demons. But Jax was already moving, his earlier weariness gone, replaced by a focused, deadly precision. He snatched up pieces of his scarred, plasteel armor, securing the essential plates with practiced efficiency. Escape to her transport was a fool's dream. The pack was already fanning out, cutting off their retreat, their glowing, predatory eyes like malevolent stars in the encroaching darkness. The storm was a monster at their backs, the night howlers a wall of teeth and claws before them. Trapped. Was this how her mission ended? How her life ended? On a desolate moon, beside a human who ate monsters for dinner? Jax pointed a thumb towards a low, reinforced structure built into the side of a rocky outcrop, his makeshift shelter. My hovel. Designed for predators and this planet's charming weather patterns. On my mark, we run. The leading night howler, larger than the others, its scales seeming to drink the last light, let out that uniquely resonant howl again, and the multitude of glowing eyes surged forward. Lyra's hand, as if of its own accord, shot out and gripped Jax's arm, her usually composed features etched with a fear she couldn't hide. "Trust me," he yelled, his voice cutting through the rising shriek of the wind. Her nod was almost imperceptible, lost in the chaos. "Then run." They burst through the shelter door's scant heartbeats before razor claws shredded the air where they'd stood. The reinforced plasteel screamed as the first night howler, no, this was a Kragner, the moon's true terror, slammed into it with the force of a runaway thresher. Jax, his name now Rorik, shoved Lyra, now Commander Alara Vane of the Cygnian Protectorate, further inside, spinning to meet the monster. Lightning, a strobing, violent purple from the Xylan megacyclone, intermittently lit the desperate scene, the pursuing pack, a tide of obsidian scales and glowing red eyes, and the one Kragner whose resonant howl seemed to orchestrate their fury. This wasn't just a hunt, it was a coordinated assault. Rorik's combat blade, a relic of some forgotten Terran conflict, wasn't designed for creatures this size, but desperation lent it a vicious edge. He didn't aim for a kill, just a deterrent. A blinding stab towards an eye, a shriek of pain from the beast, and then Alara was there, her slender form belying her strength as she heaved the heavy blast door shut. The locking bolts, thick as a man's wrist, slammed home with a resounding thud. The shelter door groaned, the metal protesting as the rest of the Kragner pack hurled their colossal bodies against it. Outside, titans clashed with thunder. Inside, two souls were trapped with a tension far more intimate and explosive. The confined space, no more than a few square meters, reeked of ozone from the storm, damp earth, and the faint, metallic tang of Rorik's blood from a fresh gash on his cheekbone. He was checking the door seals, his movements economical despite the adrenaline thrumming through him. Alara leaned against the cool metal wall, her chest heaving. Her usually immaculate Cygnian uniform was smudged with grime, her silver-streaked black hair plastered to her temples. You saved my life, Terran." Her voice was barely a whisper, the formality of her rank giving way to raw, breathless honesty. Rorik grunted, not turning. "You'd have done the same." A simple statement, yet it hung in the air, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their species. Would she have? For a creature who defiled her people's most potent symbol of fear? The question flickered in her luminous amethyst eyes. This forced proximity was unnerving. She was intensely aware of him, the heat radiating from his body, the scent of sweat and something uniquely human. The survival bond forged in those few frantic seconds of the desperate run was a tangible thing, coiling around them in the sudden, deafening silence between the storm's fury and the Kragner's renewed assault. She found herself studying his battle-worn features, now illuminated by the shelter's emergency chem lights that cast long, dancing shadows. The fresh scratches, the determined set of his jaw. "Earlier," she began, her voice gaining a little strength, "you spoke of Terrans as apex predators. Yet, back there, with that creature, there was a certain control. A restraint, almost. It wasn't just brute force, it was calculated, a terrifying efficiency." Rorik finally turned, his blue eyes, flecked with gray like a winter sky, meeting hers. "Being top of the food chain isn't just about strength, Commander. Or ferocity." He wiped a smear of Kragner ichor from his blade onto his thigh. "It's about knowing when to strike. And, just as importantly, when to protect what's yours. Or what you decide needs protecting." He paused, And his gaze softened, just a fraction, as he gently, almost reverently, brushed a stray strand of damp hair from her face. The gesture, from a man who had just faced down a Xylan nightmare with little more than a knife and sheer grit, was so unexpectedly tender it made her breath catch. Could a being so primal also possess such gentleness? It was a paradox that both intrigued and unsettled her. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, punctuated by deafening cracks of thunder that vibrated through the plasteel floor. Elara jumped at a particularly violent concussion, a purely involuntary reaction that brought her a step closer to Rorik. Neither of them moved to re-establish the distance. The air thickened. "Your people," Rorik observed, his voice a low rumble that seemed to counter the storm's bass notes, "they fear these creatures." And rightly so. But fear, it isn't always rational, is it? Sometimes, Elara, what we're conditioned to believe we should fear turns out to be exactly what we need. He leaned closer, the scent of him, wild and strangely comforting, filling her senses. Or who we need. A shiver traced its way down her spine, a sensation entirely unrelated to the shelter's dropping temperature. "And what about you, Terran?" She challenged, her voice softer than she intended. "What does a man who eats monsters truly fear?" His eyes, usually so direct and unyielding, darkened slightly. A flicker of something unreadable passed through them. Losing control, he admitted, his voice rough. Or, wanting something. Or someone, too much. The words, heavy with unspoken implications, settled between them, a tangible weight in the charged atmosphere. Could he be talking about? No. It was impossible. Wasn't it? Outside, the Kragners renewed their assault, their frustrated howls a counterpoint to the storm's relentless fury. But inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, a tempest of emotions Elara had never anticipated. She found herself drawn to this paradox of a man, this Terran who could slaughter Xylos's most terrifying predator and yet treat her with a disarming gentleness. The initial shock and revulsion were fading, replaced by a reluctant admiration, a dangerous curiosity, and something else, something far more primal. Her fingers, almost of their own volition, traced one of the fresh, angry scratches on his armored vambrace. "Your species," she murmured, her gaze locked on the scarred metal, "you are so different from anything the Cygnian Protectorate has ever encountered. So dangerous. So unpredictable. So human." Rorik finished for her, his hand covering hers, his touch surprisingly warm, sending a jolt through her. His thumb began to trace small, slow circles on the back of her hand. "Fascinating," she breathed, not pulling away. The shelter's environmental controls hummed a monotonous tune, valiantly trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy against the chaos outside and the electric current arcing between them. Each circle his thumb traced on her skin sent shivers down her spine, igniting a slow burn deep within her. "You know," he said, his voice even rougher now, laced with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, "where I come from, on Earth, dangerous situations like this, they tend to clarify things. Put everything into sharp perspective. Make you realize what's truly important." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "And what's important right now, Rorik?" She whispered, the name tasting foreign yet strangely right on her tongue. She suspected she already knew the answer. She hoped she knew. Instead of a verbal response, Rorik closed the remaining distance between them. His calloused hand cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. The kiss was gentle at first, a hesitant question more than a demand, tasting of storm-laced air and an undeniable, shared survival bond. When Elara found herself responding, her own hands rising to grip his shoulders, the kiss deepened, becoming something more primal, more honest, a raw acknowledgement of the fire he'd ignited within her heart, a fire that mirrored the one raging in the Xylan sky. It was during a momentary lull in the Kragners' relentless assault, as they were lost in that embrace, that a subtle, rhythmic pulse emanated from the very ground beneath the shelter. Unnoticed by either of them, a small, auxiliary diagnostic panel on the shelter's main console, one Alara hadn't even registered before, flickered erratically, displaying an unknown, complex energy signature. Outside, the Kragners fell silent for a beat, their red eyes blinking in the darkness, before they renewed their attack, this time with a different, more probing, almost inquisitive strategy, as if they too sensed something new. The long night finally bled into a bruised, storm-battered dawn. The Kragners, unable to breach the shelter's defenses, had eventually retreated with the fading storm, their frustrated snarls replaced by an eerie, Xylan stillness. Morning revealed the cyclone's devastation, and the undeniable intimacy that had blossomed in the heart of it. Rorik's makeshift communication array was, predictably, fried. Twisted metal and shattered components. "Well, that's that," Alara noted, her voice still husky from the night's exertions. "Without comms, we can't contact either of our commands. We're truly on our own." Rorik, who was already assessing the damage to his meager supplies, didn't look entirely displeased. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. "Means we'll need parts from your lander, Commander. And it's still out there." He gestured towards the ravaged landscape beyond the shelter door. "Where our Kthar, Kragner, friends might still be feeling a bit peckish." Alara, Commander Alara Vane, a name now synonymous with an almost reckless bravery, felt a reluctant smile touch her lips despite their dire situation. "So, breakfast and a morning hunt for parts, Mr. Rorik." Her voice, laced with a newfound familiarity, echoed slightly in the metallic confines of the shelter. The panel, the one that had displayed that strange energy signature during the Kragner assault, briefly pulsed with a faint, emerald light before returning to its inert state. Neither of them noticed. Too much else to focus on. Rorik, already checking the charge on his pulse carbine, shot her that infuriatingly confident grin. "Sounds perfect, Commander Vane. But about last night?" He let the sentence hang, his blue-gray eyes glinting with a mixture of challenge and something softer. She cut him off, her own gaze unwavering. "No regrets, Terran. Only questions, and a sudden craving for more than just answers." A loaded statement. What was happening to her? Was this the infamous Terran unpredictability she'd read about, or something entirely new stirring within her Cygnian heart? They geared up in an easy, practiced silence, their movements already falling into an unspoken rhythm, a dangerous synchronicity that belied the fact they'd known each other less than a standard Xylan rotation. The shared trauma of the storm and the Kragner attack had forged a bond, a raw, primal connection that transcended species, rank, and the High Council's strictest fraternization protocols. As Rorik secured the last plate of his battered armor, Alara confessed, "Watching you fight those things, it was stimulating." The admission, so uncharacteristic of a Cygnian commander, surprised even herself. But then again, everything about this Terran was a surprise. Rorik simply laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to chase away some of the lingering chill in the shelter. "If I'd known killing apex predators was such an effective courtship ritual, Commander, I'd have started doing it sooner." He winked. Utterly infuriating. And yet. They emerged from the shelter cautiously, pulse rifle and Cygnian energy pistol held ready. The Xylan landscape, always harsh, had been transformed by the megacyclone. Twisted, purple-leafed flora lay flattened, and the acidic rain, a lovely local feature, had etched bizarre, shimmering patterns into the exposed crimson rock. The air was cold, sharp, and carried the lingering metallic tang of ozone. "The Cragners will have sought higher ground during the storm," Alara explained, her voice all business now as they navigated the debris-strewn path towards her downed lander. "But they'll return once they pick up our scent. And they will pick it up." "Let them come," Rorik replied, his confidence not mere bravado, but a chilling statement of intent. After the previous night, after everything, he felt different. Invincible was too strong a word. But something close. "I've got plenty of room left in my larder." They reached the lander without incident, but the sight that greeted them was far from encouraging. The cyclone had partially buried the sleek Cygnian craft in rockfall and uprooted Xylan trees, their bark like charred leather. Several of the external access panels were buckled, corroded by the acidic downpour. "This might take considerably longer than anticipated," Alara stated grimly, her Omni tool already scanning the damage. "The primary comms array components we need are, unfortunately, under all of this." Rorik was about to suggest a controlled detonation to clear the larger debris when a familiar, guttural growl echoed across the clearing. His hand instinctively went to the grip of his carbine. 3 Cragners, sleek and nightmarishly large, emerged from the tangled undergrowth, their obsidian scales gleaming wetly in the pale Xylan sunlight. Their red eyes, burning with malevolent intelligence, fixed on the 2 figures by the crippled lander. These weren't the dregs of the pack, these were hunters, fresh and hungry. "I'll handle these," Rorik said, stepping forward, placing himself between Alara and the approaching beasts. "You get those parts, Commander." Together, Rorik, Alara countered, her energy pistol already humming to life, its focusing lens glowing a dangerous amethyst. "I may not be able to take one down alone, but I can certainly provide a significant distraction." Teamwork. It was a novel concept when applied to interspecies combat, especially with a Terran. But the previous night had taught her much. The Cragners attacked not with mindless fury, but with a chilling, coordinated precision. One feinted left, drawing Rorik's fire, while the other 2 lunged from the right, attempting to flank Alara. But Rorik and Alara moved as one, a deadly dance of human aggression and Cygnian grace. Where he was raw power and brutal efficiency, she was swift precision and tactical acumen. His carbine spat searing bolts of plasma, forcing one Cragner back with a howl of pain as its scales smoked. Alara's energy pistol, meanwhile, delivered pinpoint shots to the less armored joints of the flanking beasts, her movements a blur of controlled evasions. The fight was intense, a whirlwind of snapping jaws, razor claws, and energy blasts. But it was also surprisingly brief. Rorik, with a roar that almost matched the Cragners, caught the fainting beast with a devastating combination of close-range plasma fire and a vicious follow-up strike from his combat knife that found a vulnerable spot beneath its jaw. Alara, her shots keeping the other 2 momentarily at bay, saw her opening. One perfectly aimed blast from her pistol struck a Cragner in its multifaceted eye, sending it crashing to the ground with a death shriek. The third, seeing its packmates fall, hesitated for a fatal second before Rorik's carbine ended its predatory career. Silence descended, broken only by their ragged breathing and the sizzle of cooling plasma on Cragner hide. 3 more carcasses to add to Rorik's unusual provisions. That was. Alara paused, breathing heavily, her amethyst eyes bright with adrenaline and something far more primal. Extraordinary. Rorik pulled her close, their armor clinking together, the scent of battle and ozone and something uniquely them mingling in the air. "No, Commander," he growled, his voice rough, "you're extraordinary." And then he claimed her mouth in a fierce, bruising kiss that tasted of battle fought and victory won, a primal connection sealed in the blood of their enemies. It took them the better part of the Xylan midday to extract the necessary comms components from the damaged lander, a task made considerably longer than strictly necessary by frequent, strategic breaks to further explore the rapidly evolving parameters of their interspecies relationship. By the time they returned to the dubious safety of Rorik's shelter, the twin suns were beginning their descent once more. As they worked to integrate the Cygnian tech with Rorik's salvaged Terran comms unit, the surprisingly compatible, if jury-rigged, affair, Elara found herself watching him. "You know," she said, her fingers accidentally brushing against his as she passed him a microspanner, the contact sending a familiar jolt through both of them, "when I was assigned to check on this remote monitoring post, I expected to find a primitive, perhaps even feral, Terran operative barely surviving on our frontier." Rorik merely raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "And instead," she continued, her voice a low purr, her eyes darkening with a desire that now felt as natural as breathing, "I found a man who treats our planet's deadliest predators as mere ingredients in a rather unorthodox stew. A warrior who fights like a force of nature." "And who?" She paused, stepping closer, her body fitting almost perfectly against his hard, armored frame. "Who makes me question everything I thought I knew about Terrans. About duty. About myself. Is this how it begins?" She wondered. The breaking of rules, the forging of new ones. "Is that a good thing, Elara?" Rorik's voice was a low rumble against her ear. "It's an exciting thing, Rorik." She tilted her head back, meeting his gaze. "Though I'm still not entirely convinced about your dietary choices." He laughed, pulling her closer, his arms strong and sure around her. "Tell you what. Once we get these communications online, I'll cook you a proper Kragner steak. My special recipe. If you're brave enough to try it, that is." Elara's smile was all sharp Cygnian edges and newfound Terran boldness. "Rorik Calder," she purred, "after everything we've shared in the last rotation, I think I'm brave enough for anything you have to offer." The double meaning in her words hung in the air between them, as potent and crackling as the newly repaired comms unit that suddenly sputtered to life. The harsh, static-laced voice that burst from the speaker was not from Cygnian High Command, nor from any Terran frequency Rorik recognized. It was Kthar, no, Cygnian, but panicked, desperate. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Outpost Karshan. We are besieged. Kragners, gods, at least 15 of them. They're using tactics. Coordinated. It's like they're learning. Our defenses are failing. We need immediate." The transmission cut off into a burst of screeching static. Elara's amethyst eyes met Rorik's steely blue ones. A silent understanding passed between them. "They are learning," she whispered, a chill tracing its way down her spine despite the shelter's warmth. "The pack that attacked us, they adapted their tactics during the fight." Evolution in action, Rorik mused, already checking his weapons, his earlier playfulness replaced by a grim, predatory focus. Smarter. More organized. Probably why they're hitting a fortified settlement now. He looked at Elara. "Your warriors at Karshan, can they handle that many, if they're using advanced pack strategies?" Elara's expression was tight with concern. "Not if the Kragners are truly thinking, planning. Not 15 of them. It would be a slaughter." Rorik's grin was pure, unadulterated predator. "Good thing," he said, slinging his pulse carbine over his shoulder, "they've got a Terran who specializes in hunting apex predators. and his very capable partner. He grabbed several large, cooked portions of Kragner meat from his dwindling stash, wrapping them in broad Xylan leaves. Elara raised an elegant eyebrow. "Really, Rorik?" "Now." "Trust me," he replied, that confident, almost arrogant tone back in his voice, the one that, inexplicably, sent shivers of anticipation down her spine. "Sometimes, Commander, the best way to understand your enemy is to consume them. And sometimes, the best way to show them who's really at the top of the food chain is to have a little feast in their honor, right before you send them to their ancestors." He winked. "Psychological warfare, Signian style. Or rather, Terran style, adapted for local tastes." Their journey became a tapestry woven across the diverse landscapes of Xylos. No, let's call this world Christos, a name whispered in Signian star charts with a mixture of dread and allure. Rorik Calder and Commander Elara Vane, an unlikely duo bound by shared peril and an undeniable, evolving love, embarked on what the Signian High Command had innocuously termed a predator management training tour. But they both knew it was more. So much more. They had conquered monsters and rewritten rules on one small patch of this planet, but Christos was vast, and its terrors manifold. And now, with every sunrise, the summons from Rorik's distant Earth felt less like a commendation for his unique survival skills, and more like a chain, slowly tightening. First, they journeyed to Azure Cove, a sprawling coastal settlement nestled within a colossal reef system. Here, the Kragners, or reef stalkers as the locals called them, had adapted to the treacherous shallows, their obsidian hides now mottled with phosphorescent algae, their movements a terrifying ballet of aquatic grace and brutal power. The local Signian militia commander, a grizzled veteran named Kalen, greeted Rorik with open skepticism. "So, you're the Terran who thinks our nightmares are just ingredients?" Rorik, ever the diplomat, simply tossed Kalen a vacuum-sealed pack of expertly spiced, dried Kragner meat from their previous encounters. "Try it, Commander. Nothing teaches you to stop fearing something quite like turning it into jerky." Elara had watched, a mixture of pride and exasperation on her face, as Kalen, after much sniffing and prodding, had taken a hesitant bite. His eyes had widened. Then he'd taken another. The training sessions at Azure Cove became legendary. Rorik's methods were unorthodox. He taught the Signian warriors to think like the reef stalkers, to use the shifting tides and treacherous coral formations to their advantage, to hunt the hunters. Elara, initially his liaison, quickly became his co-instructor, her precise tactical mind complementing his raw, instinctual approach. How different was this from the initial reports of Terrans being brutish and unsophisticated? Their bond, forged in a crucible of shared danger and the quiet intimacy of Xylan nights under 3 alien moons, deepened with each shared victory. They were a team, seamless and devastating. The Signian warriors, initially wary of the strange Terran and their own commanders' unconventional partnership, soon saw the results. Morale soared. Successful hunts increased. And the whispers about Rorik and Elara's relationship, though still present, were now tinged with awe rather than disapproval. What could they say? The human and the Signian commander were a force of nature. From the humid coasts, their journey took them high into the Sky Peak Mountains, a jagged range that scraped the thin Christos atmosphere. Here, the Kragners, the summit stalkers, had evolved lighter frames, powerful lungs, and scales the color of the granite peaks, making them nearly invisible. Rorik introduced new tactics, silent movement, camouflage utilizing local flora, and exploiting the disorienting effects of high altitude on the Signians' less adapted physiology by using Terran stamina-enhancing breath techniques. He worked tirelessly, pushing himself, Elara, and his trainees to their absolute limits. "You're driving yourself too hard, Rorik," Alara murmured one evening, her strong, slender fingers working the knots from his tense shoulders as they sat by a crackling fire in a mountain cave, the wind howling outside like a hungry beast. "Even legendary Terran hunters needed rest, didn't they?" "Can't help it," he replied, leaning into her touch, the weariness evident in his voice. "Every time I see those creatures threatening your people, Alara, I think about that first night. You, looking at me like I was insane for eating one." He turned, his blue-gray eyes searching hers in the firelight. "Do you still think I'm insane?" She teased, her fingers finding a particularly stubborn knot that made him groan. "Oh, absolutely. But it's an increasingly endearing part of your charm, Terran." Her smile was soft, intimate. How could she not be drawn to this complex man? This duty versus desire, it was a constant battle within her. Their third and final assignment led them to the Obsidian Desert, a sun-scorched wasteland where the settlement of Pyre Hold clung precariously to life around a cluster of deep-bore wells. The Glassfang Kragners here were horrors of evolved lethality, smaller, faster, with fangs that could shear through plasteel and a terrifying ability to burrow beneath the shifting sands, striking without warning. The heat was brutal, the conditions unforgiving. But Rorik adapted again, teaching the Pyre Hold warriors to use the blinding sun, the shimmering heat haze, and even the treacherous dune formations to their advantage. During one particularly grueling training session, a young Signian warrior, barely more than a recruit, his face streaked with sweat and grime, had asked the question on everyone's mind, "Commander Rorik, how do Terrans do it? How do you overcome the fear?" Rorik had glanced at Alara, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, before answering. "We don't overcome it, son. We use it." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of experience. "Fear keeps you sharp. Keeps you thinking. The trick isn't to not be afraid. The trick is to make your prey more afraid of you than you are of it." Words to live by on Christos. And perhaps, Alara thought, everywhere else too. As the training tour neared its end, a subtle tension began to build between them. One evening, as they watched Christos's 3 moons, a large silver orb and its 2 smaller, violet companions, rise over the silent desert from the private balcony of their quarters in Pyre Hold, Alara finally voiced what had been on her mind for weeks. "The tour concludes next cycle, Rorik. What happens then?" He pulled her onto his lap, his embrace strong and possessive, his blue eyes intense as they bored into hers. "That depends, Alara." His voice was a low growl. "Do you want to go back to just delivering my ration packs once a month, Commander Vane?" The thought was ludicrous. Unbearable. "After everything we've shared." She traced the lines of his face, memorizing every scar, every hard angle, every nuance of the man who had irrevocably altered her universe. "I don't think I could." It was the truth. A terrifying, exhilarating truth. "Good," he growled, claiming her mouth in a kiss that left no doubt about his own feelings, a kiss that tasted of desert dust, shared victories, and a future that was as uncertain as it was undeniably intertwined. "Because I've got plans, Alara. Plans that involve a lot more than just teaching your people how to hunt Kragners." Their passion that night was particularly intense, fueled by the unspoken knowledge that their time together on Christos, this strange, dangerous, beautiful world, had changed both their lives, their very beings, irrevocably. They had moved far beyond their initial roles, beyond the human who feasted on apex predators and the Signian commander who couldn't believe it.